All right, what's up, everybody? Tay Nix here. Welcome back to the Expat Files. This is the weekly wrap up for the week ending, the month ending June 30th. And these collection of stories that I do with my weekly wrap up is really just me putting a message in a bottle. I'm just actually making a post, right, which will live forever on the internet, to talk about sort of what was happening this week or what grabbed my eye. Obviously, there's tons and tons of events unfolding way faster than we could possibly make sense of it all. And when I started the Expat Files, my entire motivation was to try to be the kind of dot connector about the things happening around us that I saw other people who are very good dot connectors also doing in their content, in their publications as well. And I've worked for some really good ones. The people at the Agora, the great Bill Bonner is maybe the greatest dot connector on the internet. He was really the original guy who monetized a blog, and he's still writing that daily diary today. I always recommend people to read Bill's daily diary. It's as good as and as well thought out. And he is a dot connector par excellence. He's probably one of the most entertaining people to read on the internet. And so in keeping with the theme of connecting dots, I just checked out, here's what I came across this week. And partly, again, why I'm doing this is I don't find many people either willing or able to sort of make sense. And it's not easy to make sense of what's going on around us. And so I just pull this stuff up. I do not know that all of these stories are true, but I think to myself, that's interesting, isn't it? Here's a story. It was announced several months ago, I think, that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were going to do something to try to get rid of mosquitoes, and so they're going to genetically modify mosquitoes so that they can't reproduce. And lo and behold, right, there's cases of malaria. Now, curiously enough, right, obviously Florida and Texas are very much against the agenda that Bill and his ilk are trying to push, right? Bill thinks we should have more injections into humans. And so what better way to do that than to engineer mosquitoes that actually spread malaria through North America? And then we can all take malaria vaccines too. At least that's how it appears. So that's very interesting. A story here, I'm fairly certain the story is true, that there's malaria found in the US. Whether or not that has to do with Bill's mosquitoes, we don't know, but it seems interesting. That's an interesting turn of events, that something like that would take place. If your goal was to get people to get injected more, that would be a way to do it. This is a story. If you don't know who Nigel Farage is, he was instrumental in the decision that the British voted on in a referendum to leave the European Union, the so-called Brexit. This was in 2016. It was another shot heard around the world, just like the election of Donald Trump, which really, as a phenomenon, whatever you think of Trump, love him or hate him, it's important to understand why he matters at all. And the reason he mattered at all, just like Brexit mattered, right? Why did these events matter? They mattered because people who were living in the US or the UK were really pissed at the establishment. They were really fed up and really bitter and felt like they had sort of had enough. Now, a news story came out. I did hear this. I don't have a guy in the Atlantic, which is just sort of very politically charged, and what isn't politically charged, online periodical, The Atlantic, right? Very much into pushing Joe Biden's agenda. It's just nauseating, right? How much politics runs everything right now. Wrote a story about Robert Kennedy and why Kennedy also is a lunatic, et cetera, as if there's no reason for somebody like Trump or somebody like RFK to be a prominent figure, to be noticed, to actually have relevance to the events and the arguments and the debates that are going on today. Obviously, the world is a mess right now in July 1st, 2023. And it's going to get worse because there's a lot of things that have to get sorted out. And there's people who don't want things to change. And there's people who are really very seriously going to make trouble when things don't change, or they're going to try to get their way and create a new system. And we're seeing this from the very highest levels to all the way down to our personal lives. COVID has really thrown a wrench into the machine of our previously very sedate, very peaceful world, where everybody knew which way was up and, you know, what gender was what and everything else. And all of that has now come to an end. And Robert Kennedy and Trump and Nigel Farage and Brexit, all of these things were, of course, symptoms of the growing anger, especially right with Trump and especially with Brexit, regarding the way sort of regular people had been treated, right? And even I think more specifically, the unbelievable updraft of wealth to the upper 1%, 0.1%, 0.01%. Of both nations, especially after the dreadful resolution to the 2008 global financial crisis. And Trump really played on that. And things weren't going that well in the UK either. And Nigel said, we need to get out of the EU. The EU will go away. The EU is going to collapse. There's no possibility they're going to hold it together. And you're sort of watching it unfold right now. Obviously, the fact that there's war in Europe and that a wider war looks like it, everybody's just determined to make the war worse and to make it go on longer and for lots and lots of people to get killed. And that's a completely predictable response when things get out of control. Historically, certainly in the history of the 20th century, the thing to do is to take your country to war. And so now we're seeing that exact thing play out. And NATO, which is really just the US, is really excited to try to have a wider war in Europe. Well, what is that going to do? Obviously, people in Europe are not going to sit around and sort of enjoy that. And so the exodus out of Europe, the breaking up of these countries, the dreadful lack of leadership or the qualities of the people in charge right now, trying to drive, you know, further wedges between all of these events unfolding. There's a lot of reasons, and this is my point, there's a lot of reasons for regular people to be really pissed off at what is happening. Whether, and I mentioned RFK, you look at RFK and why he matters today. Well, in every interview, and we'll get to him in a second here, in every interview, he closes with, show me where I'm wrong, show me how I got this wrong. And nobody so far will even take up the mantle to actually debate him on the topic of how big pharma has really captured the medical establishment and the institutions in general. And so now that he's running for president of the US, he's obviously going to be in the news a lot. And the best anybody seems to be able to do is to just continue to throw mud and slop at him and claim that he's obviously, he must be a lunatic because look at him. Everything's fine. There's nothing to see here. There's no reason that reasonable people would be upset with what's taking place in the world today. So if you're paying attention to Robert Kennedy, and you know, he's talking about why probably you shouldn't get 72 or 76 different injections that are now on the schedule for your children. And that if you have a problem with that, then you must be a lunatic. You probably support Trump, and how dare you, you know, rebel against the obviously superior wisdom of the elites. And so that people like Trump and Farage and RFK exist is because there's very serious problems that nobody seems willing to even acknowledge, let alone try to forward any solution to. And so we are going to live through a really wild time. We've entered this kind of tunnel, and we'll see who comes out the other side. But in any case, Farage is being forced, perhaps, to leave the UK. His bank accounts have been shut down. And this is interesting. I have a story in my own life that I won't tell here, but we live at a time now where technology is such that your life can just be shut down. And then in the effort to pretend that there's a democratic process still in play here, like in Farage's case, he went to the bank, they said, fill out these papers, you can appeal. The appeal takes 100 days, but I mean, you won't be able to live without a bank account for that long. And so, you know, on the surface, you're allowed to actually let the process of, you know, going through and jumping through hoops and filling out paperwork to try to reinstate your bank, right? If your business gets shut off, if your online presence is closed down, right, that you could appeal this, but actually the appeal process is just another way to get rid of you and to further actually handcuff you and waste your time. And so I see this coming. I see all of these pieces now in place. We have just as much ability to surveil and also to wreck people's lives, right, with using big tech and labeling people nut jobs and closing down their bank accounts because we don't like your political point of view. And that's exactly what's happening to Farage. And so, again, Trump's mansion was raided. Okay, if you hate Trump, then you're cheering that. Except that, of course, if you connect the dots and you look a little bit beyond that, there's no question that that can now be done to other people too. So you're a politically, in the UK, they call it politically exposed person. Or I think it's exposed, PEP. And so Farage is politically exposed. And so that means that if the political machine in power doesn't want your views to be heard, they can run you out of the country. And so obviously Farage is a big time. This is a major figure in British politics. He speaks for an enormous number of people. And, coming from a guy who I would love to see all politics and all politicians actually go out and get productive jobs. The world would be a much better and much safer place if they decided to do that. But nonetheless, right, since we're stuck with this system and since humanity continues to believe that we need governments at the scale and to the level that we do, and so that people are willing to play along with this entire disastrous charade of giving up their own power. And it's clear at this point in human history that the free market can do much better anything that the government pretends to try to do. And so if we talked about political philosophy and what would a sound moral philosophical viewpoint be, much better for people to take responsibility and get on with their own lives, and for individuals to interact and do win-win deals. Government has to do none of that. The government is the one entity in society that can force you to do something against your own better judgment, because the government can use legalized force. This is a very important point. Don't ever forget, government means control of your mind. And this is exactly what this institution has really set themselves the task of doing, and why more people don't understand that, or at least have enough savvy or sense of humor, right, to see it for what it is beyond me. I don't fully grasp why people would choose to live enslaved the way most people do. But good old Nigel looks like he's on the way out. Who knows, right? Some kind of maybe the hand of God will save him from leaving the UK. But at this point, it's probably better for people like Nigel to leave. It's better for all people of goodwill to simply leave. The centralization of power that is taking place across the West will fail. It's going to be an awful disaster when it fails, and as it fails, it will, of course, be doubled down on. But great big sweeping changes are coming. And the big story that I'll be covering over and over again is the huge change that's coming to America's monetary system. And it is coming soon. It is barreling down the tracks as the world continues to use less and less dollars. The de-dollarization thing and the debt problem are real. It's a huge issue, and it's gonna affect your life and mine. There's no question about it. We all benefited from the incredible largesse of US money printing, and now we're about to pay the piper together. So good luck to Nigel. I don't wish him ill, that's for sure. Seems like a decent fellow. He stands for all the right things, but he's on the right side, the wrong side of the political argument right now, as far as the people in charge are concerned. And so the fact that a guy as prominent as he is can be simply kicked off the island and that's it, right? There's nothing you can do. You can't appeal anywhere to just get rid of you. Shows you what kind of world we're living in. So mind your P's and Q's. This is interesting. A scientist, Lou Rockwell, if you don't know, is a really excellent news aggregator. Joseph Mercola, the reporter, the author of this here, talked about Zhao Yusen was a 54-year-old scientist who apparently understood that a lab leak had occurred. She was thrown off a building. The story itself is worth reading. All these links will be in the show notes. I just find this interesting. Is this true? I don't know. I have no way to verify this, but fairly interesting. Fairly interesting idea here, that when somebody knew, and that in fact, right, you send work on a COVID-19 vaccine no later than November 2019, that would further her strengthen her claims that SARS-CoV-2 was created in a lab and subsequently escaped from that lab. So she had a way to sort out the entire thing, but of course that wasn't allowed, right? If the idea is that whoever came up with this strain of coronavirus wanted this to happen, right? Obviously, you can't have a vaccine for it that actually works, created by the person working in the lab who knew how to stop it. And so maybe that's true, right? It's very interesting, no question about it. Somebody thrown off a building, well, that's fairly substantial news, I would say. And so, will we ever totally know exactly what happened with the entire COVID fiasco and the whole episode itself? Probably not. But as we connect dots, I find such stories interesting. Even if there was a person named Zhou Yusen and she died falling off a building and she worked at the lab, that's pretty damn interesting by itself. That's fairly interesting. It raises a certain number of questions. And so I grabbed this too. I just thought it was, again, nobody cares about the island of Haiti, or Haiti is on Hispaniola, not too far from me where I'm recording. And because nobody cares about the people in Haiti, no jabs were administered. The government's a complete wreck. It's essentially a failed state. And so they didn't have the ability to actually stab people with these mRNA gene therapy injections. And lo and behold, they had no COVID deaths. Well, so was the illness in the injection, or how does Haiti have no injections and no COVID deaths? Again, it raises a fairly interesting question. I have no way to verify if this is actually true. I don't know if this is actually true, but it is interesting. It is interesting. And it certainly suggests that, right, as more and more people have come to at least consider the unbelievable dishonesty of what has taken place since 2020. This clown is the new Prime Minister of New Zealand. He's meeting with Klaus Schwab and the President of China. He's obviously a perfect stooge for whatever is taking place in New Zealand. I won't play this for you.
Summer Davos, a great opportunity to
actually I will.
Some other leaders and have some cultural conversation.
Particularly Stockholm World Economic Forum meeting dubbed Summer Davos.
He looks like a proper little puppy dog, doesn't he? You can be sure he's going to be doing whatever he's told to do as one world government sort of ramps up. Just talked to my friend Chris in New Zealand, and it's awful, right? Just the level of apathy. He talked about the level of apathy. You can see that interview here on the podcast. The level of apathy and the level of just complete delight and satisfaction and being really, really stupid and really ignorant about what's taking place in New Zealand. And that's the level, that's the basic description of the average Kiwi right now, according to my friend Chris. This was painful. I actually watched this. This is a debate between this doctor. This woman tries to take RFK to task on his stance. Robert Kennedy Robert Kennedy Jr. Was a lawyer, right, and litigated against Big Pharma. The guy's so well spoken, and he can pull up so many different pieces because of his career litigating against Big Pharma. And so these debates are often very, very painful to watch. It's essentially a shill in the audience. And okay, fair enough. I mean, the guy's asking the tough question. Hey, why aren't you on board with vaccines? Don't we need vaccines? I spent years in medicine too. And one of the dumbest conversations that you always got, because my expertise was in the Chinese medical model, and I actually took my knowledge of that and I brought it to hospitals and I taught doctors. We franchised acupuncture, or very closely franchised it into the hospital system. And so I had a chance to talk to a lot of doctors. And one of the things it was so infuriating, it was so stupid that I very quickly just stopped participating in the discussion. But you would always get people who would say, yeah, we think alternative medicine has a really good future and it's an important thing. And then they would always hedge with, but of course, modern medicine is really great because, antibiotics. And it's like, well, and so the same thing took place here. And what makes these debates where people try to just sort of, again, right, hurl rotten tomatoes at RFK, is that the guy knows his shit so well on the topic of vaccines. He's so well versed. He understands the history of the litigation, who has paid billions of dollars in fines because they haven't proven that their products work, how many people have actually been injured by these things, like all of the stuff that you would have to bring if you were to have, to actually create a legal case against some of these large pharmaceutical corporations. And so that's what he did for many, many years. And so he really understands the topic very, very well. And so you get people who want to argue, and a guy stands up in the audience and says, but, diphtheria is greatly reduced in Africa because, of this vaccine. It's like, well, no shit. We're not saying that there's no place for getting rid of infectious disease, but the obvious argument still, and it's really beautiful to watch RFK argue these points, because his whole point is, show me where I'm wrong. Show me where this position that I've taken isn't true. And nobody can do that. And in fact, nobody even wants to do it. This pile of shit, Peter Hotez, who's a complete shill for the establishment, right, and has made himself famous by trying to essentially, right, explain why everybody and children especially need to be getting more injections, especially COVID injections, without any actual evidence that that's a good idea. That he's still arguing this, and that Joe Rogan invited Hotez to come on the show and to debate RFK, and that of course that he wouldn't do it. And so this kind of dynamic will happen over and over again, and of course people are catching on, which is why the Atlantic wrote the story they did about how RFK is a lunatic, and he's just a democratic version of Trump who's trying to essentially overturn the apple cart of the very, very honest and noble establishment inside America that's doing their best to look out for the population, which of course is complete sarcasm and is completely untrue. And so RFK in these debates, taking the stand that he has is like a thunderclap through our culture right now. And it seems worthwhile. It seems very, very important that somebody's willing to take the stance that he has. So quite frankly, I wish him well. I couldn't care less about US politics, but it's going to affect us all. I hope the guy has a great showing. The longer he stays in the race, the more problems he's going to cause to the people in charge. And I'm definitely in favor of that. So I'll put this in there if you want to watch it. It's very short. It's only like 14 minutes long, but it's really good. You get to see how he conducts himself in front of these people. So this is a heat map of, and it's in French, but this guy's reporting on riots all in and around France and Paris in particular. Now, is there actually unrest in all these places? I don't know. There was a big brouhaha and a big dust up because a young kid was, I guess, detained from a traffic violation and the police killed him. I don't know how it happened. But obviously France is a bit of a wild card. I mean, they fancy themselves real contrarians, and they have a history of being sort of volatile, right? Ever since the French Revolution, which really did overturn the order of Europe. It's the French that see themselves as the real activists of the European community. And so it's very interesting to watch. Obviously, they're at the center of Europe, and it's not obvious, right, that Macron is going to hold on to power and that things won't get completely out of control in France. And so this heat map, if it's even remotely accurate, shows exactly what was happening there this past week. And to just finish up my thoughts, this is from whoever this is from August 21. So I don't know that this has actually been instituted. I have not heard this, but it's an article explaining why, and she's celebrating that the AMA has decided not to report the gender of a baby at birth. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. It just caught my eye as something. It's like, it's another example of just how insane the discourse has become. Like that somehow it's a good thing now to confuse children, whether they're male or female. The whole transgender thing has a really interesting root, I would say. But it is mostly an effect of other things that have taken place. My mentor has argued, and I would argue and agree, once you queer the money supply, and I'm using that word on purpose, once you turn the money into something that it's not, where you can just print, like, let's just print $8 trillion, right? And we'll just put that into the system and then we'll all feel rich. Once you do shit like that, you get all kinds of areas where people break apart from reality. And I think the transgender thing is a good case in point. Obsession with sex, and not just obsession with sex, right? Obsession with the old way isn't good enough. And in fact, it's so not good enough, we should break it at the most fundamental level where there's nothing even true about male and female. It won't work, of course, and these people will disappear once the wheel goes around. And certainly when times get tough, nobody's going to care about these topics. But it is interesting to watch sort of the trajectory of that. And the last thing I wanted to share here, this is such a good paragraph. I just wanted to actually close on this. Gary D. Bennett, very worthwhile to read. Again, posted on Lou Rockwell. You can see the link below. When dissent ends, transhumanism reigns, digitization rules, and humanity will cease to be human. This is such a good piece. Just the opening paragraph here. I love the quote. The only thing worth globalizing is dissent. Amen. Self-defense is talking about the unbelievable importance of refusing to obey things that you disagree with, especially when it comes from the state. And if you think about it, there is one way and one way only for the madness around us to come to an end peacefully. And that's if everybody just refuses to play along, right? This would have been the case with the whole COVID thing. Roughly a third of the world refused to comply or couldn't get access to shots, who knows? Probably the thinking element of society that was able to piece together and connect the dots well enough to refuse to go along with what was, by every record that I've seen, an illness that was 99-point-something% survivable. That's not a bad idea, right? That you should probably be willing to stand up and say, actually, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm not doing that. I'm not playing along. I'm not going along with what I'm being ordered to do. And so this piece on self-defense seemed valid to me. Self-defense comes in many forms, but all defense of self begins and ends with dissent, non-compliance, disobedience, saying no to any and all rule, and never allowing aggression against mind and body, mental or physical. Without dissent, defense is not possible, because when voluntary compliance is the prevailing behavior, whether sought, desired, or not, all defense mechanisms are effectively disarmed. In other words, silence in the face of injustice, immorality, terror, or tyranny creates a condition of weakness, submission, and irresponsibility, which are all the fodder of indifference. When you say nothing, when you do not say no, when you take no action against evil, you commit evil. By not speaking out and by not responding, you have spoken loudly and openly committed an act of cowardice. The ultimate blame lies not with just the aggressor in this circumstance, but also equally with he who hides and remains silent. The entire article is there to read. It's actually really well written, but it does occur to me that there's real truth in the statement that obviously defense of yourself starts with refusing to obey people who want to harm you. And since the government really has nothing good in store for you, and we're going to see this on a very large scale as they try to clean up the mess that they themselves have created and hold on to their power, it's coming. And so, again, my goal here is not to freak anybody out or even make things worse. That's not what we're doing. I think an honest discussion of what's taking place, there should be places where that can happen, and I'm trying to provide one. But also my goal in all of this is just to help you connect dots. Doesn't mean I have all the answers. Doesn't mean any one person or one source has all the answers. But I think the ability to think for yourself about what's taking place and to try to make sense of this piece of information and how it connects to this thing over here is a worthwhile endeavor. So thanks very much. That's enough out of me. You can catch all the podcasts and the other good information at Sovereign Expat Phyles. That's PHYLES, sovereignexpatphyles.com. And I'll have much more great information and interviews and all kinds of content coming your way. Thanks again for watching.